Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. This is the podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see exactly what sustainable travel means to them. So today we're here with Lexie, who is a sober traveler and mindful traveler. We're going to chat all about that and what exactly that means to her. So Lexie, hi.
Hello, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's such a joy.
Oh my God, Jinx, it is an absolute joy. We're so happy to have you. I'm pretty much going to throw it over to you. So, Lexi, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? And you've been traveling full time for a while now. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lexi. I like to describe myself as a sober yogi and thoughtful traveler. Back in February 2021, I dedicated my life to traveling full time, or at least building a life off of global travel. And I moved to South Korea, Busan, to teach English with my partner, Jeremy. And we were in Busan teaching English for 2 years. It was my first time fully living abroad. And it was incredible. There were a lot of high highs and low lows. It was during the pandemic. It was a wild experience. But after 2 years, we decided, you know what? We want to travel even more because living abroad is great, but we still had that itch.
Yeah.
Left Korea and then used our savings to backpack Asia full time for 7 months, which was also incredible. We learned so much. And then we moved to Australia, where we were on a working holiday, living mostly in Melbourne for 9 months. And then I'm so happy to talk about that, but we ended up kind of running out of money, not really sustainably traveling full time anymore. So rather than go to another country, we decided, hey, let's go back to our home country of the United States, ground a bit, and let's focus on really building our own business, building something sustainable where we can pivot in the future and go kind of from like broke backpacker hustle, which I'm still a big proponent of, but pivot to something more sustainable where we can really build something that lasts and travel full time and have even more freedom. So now we're back in Chicago, my hometown, and I signed a lease for the first time in years. I'm 2 weeks into it, which is crazy.
Fun.
But now I have time. The focus now, which we can talk about too, is just really building my travel blog. I'm also a yoga teacher and kind of, yeah, leaning into that. And we'll see where it goes. Lots of plans, but yeah, it's very exciting.
Amazing. I mean, travel doesn't stop just because you went back home. Like, that's an awesome way to travel.
Amen. That is true. I keep telling myself that.
I have to be like, no, look, there's the UK. The UK is amazing. You can travel in the UK, but it's the same with the US.
Totally. And it's so funny. I've never been to Canada or Mexico. I've never been anywhere in North or South America except the United States, which is wild. So have lots of plans for 2025 to focus on Canada and Mexico and then a little bit of Central America. And then we are saving currently to backpack South America as our next big backpacking trip. So we'll see.
That's amazing. And so Jeremy's from the States as well.
Jeremy's also from the States. He's from Minnesota. And I dragged him down to Chicago. So we're in Chicago. We're both back in a classic 9 to 5. Yeah, which is, it's 50-50. It's not the dream. It is like not what I want. But after being like very broke in our working holiday in Australia, it is nice to have the sustainability of like that paycheck and in the US, which I could talk about all day, every day, but that's not why we're here. You don't have healthcare without a job. So that is another thing being here. We really needed that full-time work to have health insurance. Love that for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, very necessary.
Let's talk about sober travel. So obviously you were in, you said Southeast Asia and Australia, two famously difficult places to be sober. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I moved to South Korea February 2nd, 2021, and I was not sober when I moved to Korea. We can talk about my drinking story. It's definitely its own big sort of tale that I also don't really have down to an elevator pitch yet, but we could definitely go there. But my drinking was something that I always say I wasn't that classic movie, like Hollywood alcoholic of like waking up drinking Jack or like drinking Listerine in secret. Like a lot of people think that's certainly some people's story, but it wasn't mine. My drinking was escalating and it had been a problem for a very long time. I'm 30. I moved to Australia when I was, or sorry, South Korea when I was 26. And my drinking was a problem probably like when it started, like high school on. And I was known as the party girl, the big drinker, the out all night till the sun comes up. That was my entire personality. So when I moved to Korea, and I think a lot of travelers, maybe most travelers, can empathize with this. The way you meet people is going out, going to bars. So that was a big part of my life when I first got there. And then it became abundantly clear I could not ignore it. I mean, it was abundantly clear earlier on that my drinking was a problem and that it had to stop. And that all came to a head 2 months after living in Korea, 3 months. So I got sober. My sober date is May 9th, 2021. And that was
Huge.
wild. Yeah, it's been a while now, which is exciting. Going on, it'll be 4 years coming up in May
Wow.
now. Yeah.
Huge
Um,
achievement.
Thank you. But getting sober abroad, it was equally the hardest thing and the greatest thing. On the one hand, it was only a few months into living abroad as well, so I didn't have those like deep friendships yet. So a lot of my friendships were very superficial, just kind of like party friendships, but I was so lucky to be there with my partner, and Jeremy really took on so much of the emotional labor that he really shouldn't have, but we were also living abroad, kind of explored going to AA. There was nothing in English near me. My Korean, I was learning, but I did not move to Korea, having spoken Korean. So it was very isolating, but at the same time, I say it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because my friendships in Chicago and in the United States, it was steeped in booze. Everyone that I was best friends with, we were just, I don't want to say just, that's also not true, but big party friendships. And I had tried to even do a sober month many times in Chicago, and it never worked because of 100 things. And of course, it's me, but also my friendships and coworkers. Everything
Yeah.
revolved around alcohol. So I'm also so grateful that I was overseas, abroad, totally on the other side of the world from all those people. And
Yeah.
so it was easier also, I think, to get sober. I didn't have all that pressure and habits. I was creating a new life already.
Mm.
So yeah, 50-50. But ultimately, I don't think I would have ever gotten sober in Chicago. I really don't
Yeah,
think I would.
because you and I have talked about before, like we both come from that corporate sales culture in our jobs, and it's hard to be sober when you're in sales.
Totally. And I come from like commercial real estate, and
Mm.
it's just the same. And
Mm.
like we always joke, especially in downtown Chicago, that it's the one Mad Men industry left of like real estate and sales, like genuinely where everything, I mean, even now I went back and I'm back in commercial real estate, which is I'm actually happy now, but I still couldn't have done it in early recovery. I'm so grateful to be where I
Yeah.
am now. But one of my interviews, and I did not take this job, the person interviewing me drank a literal bottle of champagne and everyone else. And he sat and like downed a bottle of champagne. And I was like, this is wildly inappropriate. But I'm like, that's the industry. Like, that's what they want, like in your interviews. So, anyways, I digress. That's not what we're here to chat about. But I think in so many industries, that's something I want to talk more about on my platform is sobriety in business.
Mm.
But I think travel and especially backpacking is so boozy often. And to pivot into sober travel, most people, when they think of travel and when they think of vacation, they want to blow off steam. They want to relax. They want to have fun. And for a lot of people, that's an excuse to drink all day, have those
Yeah.
brunch drinks, have that break in the afternoon, go get cocktails, go get a beer somewhere, and then pivot into pairing drinks with your dinner or doing a tour. And then often like when we're young and we're traveling at hostels, well, you don't need to be young. I was just traveling at hostels. But when you're traveling at hostels, how do you meet people? Pub crawl and everyone's drinking till they black out. So no matter where you are on that spectrum of travel, there's often this belief that you need alcohol to relax, to have fun, to connect. And
Mm,
so, being in the space of sober travel, I find it so important because it is countercultural.
mm.
And I've discovered it to be this kind of radical way to travel.
Yeah.
And I've really discovered that it's this, I always say it's like the biggest travel hack because everything's gotten
Yeah.
better. I was so afraid my life was over when I got sober and the travel was over, and it's gotten so much better. So I'm so
Yeah.
excited to share that with people.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point that like people use it to blow off steam, but also in terms of cultural travel and like when you go to different places, like there is so, and you've made this point before, I know there's like every country I can think of, I can also think of the respective alcohol. You know, like Japan, you've got sake, Italy, you've got your Aperol spritz, you've got your red wine. Like when you go to France, you want to go to the wine regions. Like it's actually a part of travel that people think, you know, I need to immerse myself by having this alcohol. So what you're doing is like really interesting because it's also taking that and saying, well, this isn't the part of the culture that I want to engage with, but I'm still going to do it completely mindfully, completely immersively. And I mean, yeah, so that's a question that is not on my list of questions. Sorry to throw you a curveball, but how did sober travel lead you to mindful travel?
Oh, they're so interlinked. It's so funny. So to preface that, I started teaching yoga in 2018. So I've been in this world of yoga, meditation, mindfulness, and actually my major at uni was religious studies, and my concentration was in Southeast Asian religion. So I studied Buddhism and Hinduism specifically very deeply. So this is something that was always a part of my life. And then I was also the party girl and drinking. And it was kind of like one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, there's so much my life was very fractured. So when I got sober, it really allowed me to come into that space. I say sobriety and sober travel specifically is the most radical presence I've ever practiced in my life. In meditation and mindfulness, we talk about feeling all your feelings, being present in the moment, working through uncomfortable feelings, breathing through them, acknowledging them, and then letting them go. And then so much of drinking is the opposite of that, not feeling your emotions, not being uncomfortable, drinking them away, whether that's happy, sad, angry, uncomfortable. And so being sober and being mindful every day kind of just becomes this mindfulness practice because you're not escaping and self-sabotaging. And so
Yeah.
when it
It's
comes to
scary,
travel,
actually.
it is scary. Especially in the beginning, you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Um, and I think it's not just for people who are problem drinkers. I think anyone who's a social drinker too,
Yeah.
once you take that away, you're like, oh, wait, I'm a little nervous to strike up that conversation. Or someone says something that's maybe not aligned or maybe even offensive to you. And you're like, oh, I'm actually a little afraid to speak up when I don't have that liquid quote. I'm using the quote, liquid courage. But yeah, it's scary. And it also is like, oh my God, when you numb the bad, you're also numbing the good. And so when I'm traveling, I'm like, oh my gosh, I realized I really thought I needed that drink to tap into all the good things, but I was just numbing myself to it. And so, talking about mindful and sustainable travel, um, you're really tapping into and like being fully present to all of these experiences. And, yes, you have the low lows and you're experiencing that in all of its pain and fury. And you get that utter euphoria of the high highs when you're not numbing yourself. And so that presence has been magnificent for me of I noticed myself I definitely want to get into this about ethical and sustainable travel, but we were at this elephant sanctuary in Chiang Mai that's hands off. That's something I'm really passionate about with animal encounters, and I know you are too. I think that
Yeah.
was one of the reasons we really connected
Yeah.
also. But I saw these elephants in Thailand. They're like walking. There's this moment, and I do have it on video, like an elephant's like walking up the side of a mountain in this nature reserve, and I'm just the only one that's like sobbing. And I really do attribute that part to like this mindful, sober travel of I'm deeply affected by the good things in excess as well. And that's something people don't talk about, I think, in sobriety. That's really interesting. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's super interesting. I think you definitely are someone that I know who like allows yourself to like I've seen you before where you've been like, I'm having a bad day, and you're just like, yeah, I'm having a bad day, and tomorrow I'm gonna have a good day. And it's like very much like these genuine emotions that you're actually just allowing yourself to feel. And as a society, we don't do that. Like it's not something we're comfortable with at all.
100%. And thank you for saying that because it is vulnerable. And there's always this level, like on Instagram specifically, of I'm like, well, I want to be authentic and I'm going to do that, whether people think it's cringe or not. But then there's also this piece of like, I know that people want to come on and be encouraged. And there's this level of like, oh, you're struggling. But especially if I'm traveling full time, like, oh, but you're, in Laos, like on this jungle trek, like having the time of your life, like boo-hoo. But at the same time, I think it's so important to not just always be like the highlight reel. So I try to get on as much as possible. And definitely now we're going through a major transition from being full-time travelers to having a home base for the first time in 4 years. And yeah, it's been good. And I'm trying to like get on and be like, hey, today's rough. It's a rough one today, or it's a rough one this week. So, but I think sobriety has really taught me that. Yeah. And I hope to share that with other people that I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Like this too shall pass. Everything
Yeah,
will.
exactly.
But it's good to name it and be like, yeah, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And like, I don't need to drink this away because, tomorrow might be a better day. And I think that's great. And so, with mindful travel, for those who, because travel has a lot of labels on this podcast, we talk about sustainable, regenerative, responsible, all the rest of it. So, to you, what does mindful travel kind of mean that's different from sustainable travel, maybe, or just the same?
I think mindful travel is this radical presence. So you are experiencing everything as it is and not trying to manipulate the situation. And sometimes that can be on a tour, meeting other people. It can be out in the wilderness. It can be having a food experience. I think that mindfulness is center of not trying to change and manipulate things around you to make you more comfortable. And again, it comes into so many things. And I think it partners so well with sustainable travel because the way that I would define sustainable travel specifically is traveling in a way that preserves and doesn't deplete the place you are visiting. And now it's not perfect at all, but to do your best to not take away or destroy and like maintain these places. And that, of course, is of the earth and like sustainability and that, but it's also cultural and emotional. And so mindful travel, I think it goes so well hand in hand because you're just that radical presence and not manipulating the experience as best you can.
A lot of parallels, definitely. I think for a lot of our listeners, like they like to even think of it as like a way of giving back, and rather than just not destroying, it's like actually regenerating. And for sure, mindfulness comes into that because it's all about like connecting with the earth. And as I understand it, I'm not super mindful, but like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I love that. I love the regenerative piece too. Like, how can you make it better than you found it?
I
Absolutely.
was gonna say I would like to be mindful, but I can't sit still for long enough. Like I'm just the kind of person I can't. But
Oh
I
my gosh,
really
we should talk about this, and this is a whole nother thing. I know we could talk forever. I'm currently doing an active meditation teacher training, and it specifically is geared toward people with ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, but it's also a lineage that's a feminine practice. In a lot of like meditation spaces, it's a masculine practice to sit and be quiet and that, and then it's feminine to move and flow. And so part of it is learning all of these meditations where you're like actively moving with your breath. So I'm
cool.
really excited about that. Because I think so many people, you're like, oh, I can't sit still. And that's me, 100%. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, there's ways to kind of like tap in. But that's why I think everything can be mindfulness, like travel, this mindful way of traveling. It's not just sitting and letting things happen. It's like being an active participant in the things around you, but not necessarily like manipulating them to your will. And that's where I think like sustainable travel is so well paired with mindful travel. I think they're such a similar practice, if not the same practice. of being
Yeah.
present and learning.
And in terms, because obviously you travel as a backpacker and you travel kind of slowly, I'd say that plays very nicely into mindful travel as well, because it's this idea of like slowing down, understanding what's going on around you and being a part of it rather than seeking to just pass by.
Yes, absolutely. So slow travel changed my life. And it's such a mindful practice of so when we were traveling in Southeast Asia, we had 7 months, and I believe we explored 10 countries during that time. And we could have done a lot more, we could have done less, but with visas, we tried to spend a month everywhere. And then we did go through a few places more quickly. But my, I guess, philosophy or when I'm planning a trip, I want there to be enough time to be adequately bored in a place. I want to do all of the touristy things, of course. I mean, within reason, there's obviously things that I skip. I want to do the things that, everyone does. And then I want to do the off the beaten path things and chat with friends and do all that. And I always extend my stay if I can. Now, it's a little bit different because I'm back in a 9 to 5. But when I'm traveling, I want to be bored. I need to get bored because that's where the magic is. That's where you meet local people. That's when you're just bopping around. You're like, I'm just going to take my book to a local cafe or tea house or wherever it is on the side of the road and sit there. And all of a sudden, you start chatting with people, other travelers, locals. You find all these other places. Maybe you get invited to someone's house for a meal. Like that has happened to us. And I'm like, I tell everyone the greatest days of travel, especially full-time travel, were when we were utterly bored and had nothing to do because you're creating space and
Yeah.
for real life to happen and for it to invite you in.
Yeah.
And that has changed my life
Mm.
completely. And definitely the way I live life back at home too.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not good at letting myself be bored, but that's a
Yeah.
practice.
It's true though. Like I feel the same way. I'm terrible at it. I mean, I do have ADHD and I'm like a little Marie always says that I'm like a hummingbird because I'm just constantly like always got my hands
I
in a
love it.
project.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I have that hummingbird energy too.
yeah, I
Like,
know. But it is great because it's the days when you just kind of sit down, like as you say, maybe just take your book to a cafe, or maybe you just walking down the street and someone stops to chat to you. And instead of saying, actually, I'm on my way to see 10 tourist attractions today because I have to, because I've only got this time. Yeah, why don't I stop and chat with you? Oh, I found out that you actually run one of the tourist attractions and you can take me there inside like a local. Like those things genuinely do happen. And it's nice to just sometimes go with it.
100% and making that space. And I think even like something Jeremy and I've talked about again, now we're back in the US, 9 to 5. We have, that limited paid time off, all that. But I think so many people are like, well, I only have this time. I need to pack it in. And I have 1 week and I'm going to go through Europe and I'm going to every day go to a new country and I'm going to just do it all. And this is where I think I really personally, I hate country counting because I think it
Yeah.
inspires me out of like trying to get everywhere. And I know you want to maximize your time, but I truly cannot think of a better way to maximize your time of, okay, I only have a week. Let's go to like 1 or 2 cities, literally, maybe one. And just again, even now traveling with limited time, I much rather go way less places and actually be present in the places that we do venture to.
Yeah.
And I want to go everywhere. I want to go everywhere in the world, and it is so hard to slow down. But even with that limited time, I personally just find so much value of like, all right, well, this season, like we are going to go less places. Like it's not the same as the backpacking season. And I really believe like if for us it works to we kind of call it like conscious unemployment of like really prepping. So now we're like trying to be here for 2 years. And like I said, I am going to build hopefully to something, but do those longer trips. But anyways, while we're here, I really advocate for, yeah, with your limited time, still slow down.
Yeah. You
Even with
know,
that limited time, still slow down and it will be a much better experience and you will get so much more out of it and connect to the place you're going to so
mm,
much more deeply than just like running through.
I don't know anybody who's done full-time travel and not come out of it saying, yeah, everybody should slow down. Like it's so much better.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I don't know anyone that's like, you know what, we should have done faster.
No one says that. No one says that. And like, look, I get it. It's a privilege, right, to be like, we should slow down because we have been backpacking, we have done those things. Like, it completely is coming from a place of privilege. But at the same time, it doesn't need, like you said, just because you have 2 weeks, you don't need to travel for 2 months to embrace slow travel. You can travel for 2 weeks and just see three places. That is slow travel.
Absolutely. Just take time. And I have no interest anymore in doing travel like I did maybe when I was younger, of like every single day, like burn it to the ground, or like burn yourself to the ground, I mean, and like tour, all the place and everything. I'm like, okay, like let's go again. I'm like, I need at least a few days to absolutely have no plan whatsoever and to see where it takes you. Again, they're the best days. So highly
Yeah, they
recommend.
really are. And I mean, you've told me as well, like, because I love the way you travel. And I think, like, even before we started chatting about like sustainable travel equals mindful travel in that way, I could see that the way you were traveling was very similar to the way we travel. It's like quite in depth. It's, trying to ethical wildlife experiences, like we said, trying to make the most out of it. But you really get some like hate for the way you travel.
Yeah. So sober travel specifically, and we can talk about sobriety and then we can talk about sober travel. People often, because I post online a lot about people being, I don't know, perturbed, offended, or downright rude about me being sober and traveling. And I think a lot of people don't understand it because in their real life, they're like, I would never question someone for being sober. And I will say now that I'm back in Chicago, actually, no one has ever said a word to me. And
Mhm.
yet, when I'm traveling, especially backpacking specifically, I get a lot of hate for it. And I think it's like we talked about at the beginning, people travel and when they're backpacking, they're like, I am disconnected from society. I can do what I want. I am liberated.
Mm.
And I love that my blog and like brand name is Lex on the Loose. And yes, it's like that fun, whimsical traveling, like on the loose, but I also love to take it deeper of like, there are different ways to experience freedom. And for me, I have such immense freedom in my sobriety and being free from and cut loose, if I can go there and be a little corny, but like from that way of like needing alcohol to experience all these things. In a recovery meeting I was in early sobriety, a coach said to me, and I think this is so much more than sobriety, but we'll start with sobriety. He said, your sobriety will turn what was once an elephant in the room into a mirror for people. And people are so much more comfortable with having that elephant in the room. Like, and I don't know about you, but for me, drinking and not drinking, I hear people all the time say, just, yeah, whatever, I drink too much, or, ha, 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 I'm an alcoholic. And like, yeah, I shouldn't drink this much, but like, you only live once, da da da. And it's easy to all joke about it and have an elephant in the room when everyone's participating. But when one person steps out of that culture, it turns it into a mirror for everybody. And that is very uncomfortable. Now, I'm not saying that from a place of any sort of moral hierarchy. I'm not at all. But when I try to break down like why people get angry, I think people believe that I'm critiquing them. And that's
Mm.
really not what it is. Although I am always here. If you want to come to the other side, I will like preach the joys of sobriety for everyone, whether you are a problem drinker or not. I think everyone can benefit from sobriety and sober travel. But in that backpacking culture, I think it just brings this kind of energy of like, I'm cut loose from society and I want to drink and I want to party. And also, like you said, that cultural piece, there's a lot of people that really believe like you're not immersing yourself in the culture. And I guess to that, I just say like we have different ideas. And actually,
Yeah.
I'll give all these people all the grace in the world. And I'm the first one to say it on my platform too, that I used to be that person. And I can tell you from experience when I used to heckle people who weren't drinking, or the famous line, like, I don't trust someone who doesn't drink, all of that was a reflection of I definitely knew that I needed it in this weird way. And so it was bringing that out in me of, oh,
Yeah.
I'm really uncomfortable because I need this and I want this and I want to travel this way. And if someone else is like liberated and having a great time without it, then what does that say about my drinking?
Mm.
Um,
Maybe a bit of embarrassment as well, like people kind of thinking that you're judging when you're not.
Totally. And again, I'm like, I always say, I'm like, oh my, and I identify as an alcoholic, absolutely, even though, like we said, it wasn't that Hollywood kind of like idea of alcoholism. I had no control over whether it was going to be a one glass of wine night or a bender. I was
Mm.
absolutely not in control of my drinking. But I'm like, nobody was like saying that stuff more than me. Like, trust me, like no one was saying it more than me. And so I really understand where it comes from. And yeah, I have a lot of grace for it. And I will say, um, there's been a lot of times traveling where I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here. Like I'm very overwhelmed. Like there's a lot of hate. And so I don't want to say that and tell people that it's going to be like the impossible and everyone's going to ridicule you because they won't, but there will be times in backpacker circles specifically. I mean, you think of like who is the majority of people going on backpacking trips? In my experience, it's a lot of 18 or 22-year-olds that are doing a gap year after
Mm.
high school or uni. And I'm like, I get it. Like when you're young, it's much more about that.
Yeah.
Partying and experimenting and all of that. So, yeah, it's different. I think it was interesting. Australia was probably like the hardest on the working holiday because everyone is that like 18 or 22-year-old for the most part. And
Yeah.
Jeremy and I were like 29 and 30 doing it. And so we
Mm.
were literally 10 years older than everyone, which you should still do it. But in terms of that, like culture, I'm like, oh, being back, I'm like, with my own age group kind of friends, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not as intense pressure or culture, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think again, with travel, there is this expectation that you need to drink to have fun and blow off steam. And so people get a little more uncomfortable. But I think not to scare people as well. I think there are these beliefs that are like people get a little triggered with the sobriety. But again, um, there's also so many great things popping up now of like the non-alcoholic industry. When I was
Yeah.
first living in Korea, that wasn't a huge thing, and then it was gaining popularity even in Korea. And like most convenience stores, even all around Southeast Asia, have non-alcoholic beer. And Australia was really awesome for that, actually. They had a lot of like really cool companies that were like had craft beer and different kind of beverages that had a mission of being in like every pub in Australia.
That's cool.
um, it's so cool. So things are changing. And I think when it comes to the judgment piece, like the best way, and I think with sustainable travel and practices, this is the way as well, where it's like, I think I don't want to say catch more people. That's not the right phrasing, but you reach more people by just showing how like great your life is genuinely and being happy
Yeah.
and doing your and that draws people in more than any other kind of like critiques. So it's
Yeah.
also been really amazing being that person and having so many people or even like after like the day after being like, hey, I noticed you were sober. What's that like? Da da da. And so that's been really meaningful. Oh,
Yeah.
this is what I was going to say. We're back. Um, I think it's important to talk about because so many people, when it comes to sober travel, ask me and are really genuinely concerned about the cultural piece.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of homestays and we've done like some trekking and like staying in a local's house in Asia and things. And I will say those are, and I know people want to be respectful and try the local liquors or wine or beer or whatever it is and be respectful. I think that's what we were really talking about. And yeah, to that I say we have different ways of respecting the culture. I think there's different ways to handle it. I've
Mm.
definitely, there was a time in Laos, we did this awesome jungle trek with a local guide, and then we stayed in his hometown with his family. And they had this homemade rice wine, and he did really like pressure me to try it. And I said, no, thank you. I don't drink. He's like, well, you can't even taste it. Like you can't have a sip. And I was like, oh, no, thank you. Like I really can't. And he was like, well, how about you taste it and then you spit it out to be respectful to like my family who made this? So those concerns are real and I have experienced them. And I just said like, oh no, thank you. Like I really don't drink. And you have to stand in your power. So
Mm.
however you want to do that, I'm comfortable saying I'm an alcoholic. Some people aren't. Some people, most people know what that word means. Or you say it's for your health.
Yeah, it makes you
However
sick.
say it. Yeah. And like some
Mm.
people have different like conditions. So however you want to handle that. So I will speak to it and say that it does happen, but in all of my travels, I think it's happened like once or twice. And
Yeah.
there is privilege. My partner actually does drink. So I actually have kind of gotten out of those situations genuinely by really holding firm and then saying like, oh, but Jeremy will do it. And then I kind of forget. So I do have empathy if you're a sober traveler by yourself, because there's been times I'm alone. But I also just want to say, when you're traveling and you're participating in another culture, you also like it's not respecting their culture if you have to abandon your own self-respect to participate in
Yeah.
it. That is a really good line to draw. And I'm not saying that like drinking means you have no self-respect. Don't take a,
No.
I'm not saying, but you have to have your own set of boundaries. And I know like people have dietary restrictions while
Yeah.
traveling that they hold
I
to.
was just
And
about to say, I do think a lot of sustainable travelers, and maybe some of our listeners can relate on this front, not only just from dietary requirements, because a lot of sustainable travelers don't have dietary requirements, but a lot of sustainable travelers will try and mostly eat a plant-based diet, myself included. And when I travel, I have had it before where people have offered meat or like other non-plant-based dishes, and it can get like you're very pressured, like, and it can get very like uncomfortable and awkward. And I'm very privileged that I have Murray who does eat meat as well. So I do the same as you. I'm like, Murray will do it.
like he's got it. Yeah.
He'll take it from me. But from my side, like as well as what you said about like you have to stay true to your own beliefs, like that's not actually disrespectful to the culture if you're just saying like it makes me sick or this like I've rarely had a situation where I've put forward it makes me sick and someone has said, well, you still should try it. Like if they're doing that, ultimately they are being unreasonable.
100%. I totally agree. And I find that people would just move on so fast. Like
Yeah.
you might have that little awkward moment and then you move on. And for me, I participate in culture in so many other ways that I'm like, okay, if this little fraction isn't for me, then that's great. And something I talk about with sobriety, and I think sustainable travel, this pairs really well, is I struggled the first year of sobriety, and I really believe it was because I had these very deep core beliefs of things that really like big alcohol marketing has taught us all. And
Mm.
it's real and it's equal parts not real. And then it's also real because everyone seems to believe them. So they are very real. But like you do not need alcohol to participate in culture. You do not need alcohol to have a good time. You do not need alcohol to be like fun and sexy. You do not need alcohol to be refined. And there's so many beliefs I had. And then once you really like step out of them, like I really like how silly is it that like we believe we need to participate in drinking culture to experience a place.
Mm.
And so once you really work on that and step out, and I always say like just take a step back and look at it from kind of like a bird's eye view.
What kind of thing? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, exactly. So I really believed that I couldn't. Okay, we'll go with culture. So red wine was my favorite thing in this entire world, and I knew I had a problem because I loved it more than everything in my life. And even when my drinking was spiraling, I'm like, it's just I was never ever gonna cut it out. And I really did used to believe because I spent in my drinking days, I've not been to Europe sober, so I'm really excited to rewrite that story in the future. But I lived in Italy for a summer. I really believed that you had to partake in like all the local vineyards and the culture, like
Mm.
wine drinking to participate in culture. And when I first got sober, I had this very weird, and I know it's weird, it's very funny, but I had this like thought of I'm like, I will never drink wine in Italy again. And then I had this belief because I've never been to France. I'm like, I'll never be able to go to France. I'll never be able to go to Spain. I'll never be able to go to Georgia. Like these countries that I hadn't been to that have a wine culture. And I'm like, I'm just never gonna go there because they don't want me there and I can't participate in the culture. And like, I would just be offensive. And like and it starts as a little seed. And then, maybe if y'all have anxiety, you can relate, but I do. And so you spiral and you have these big beliefs. And I mean, they're both real and they're not real again, because yeah, that is a big part of the culture. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this is what I do to myself. I'm like, Lexie, let's take a break. Let's breathe. And
Hmm.
then I'm like, let's take a step back. I really want to travel to Italy, but I'm vegan and I don't eat cheese. And cheese is such a big part of Italian culture. Or I'm like severely lactose intolerant. I'm going to be like vomiting and having stomach cramps. I would say like that is silly. You should absolutely go and experience all the other parts. And no one in Italy is going to say, get out of my country, you horrible, horrible person. And
No.
so it's kind of that, like, let's like take us about. And now I know there's probably a listener that's like, actually, and like, you know what? Fine, 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 fine. But there's more to a culture than just this sliver. And not to say that everyone that drinks alcohol is, I'm not saying that, but for me it is. I
Yeah, that's
can't,
your
and
boundary.
I won't. And it's a boundary.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it pairs with, again, like sustainable travel so well. You're making these conscious choices that
Mm.
thinking about like what is of highest good for you and the other people involved.
Yeah.
And stepping out of your own story is very helpful to me. So it might be
Mm.
helpful to other people in a wealth of ways.
I mean, boozy backpacker culture in general is it doesn't tie into sustainable travel, let's be honest. Like there are ways you can be a sustainable backpacker and drink, but the culture in general, yeah. So before we go off on another tangent, I do want to know what's been the best experience you've had as a soap traveler?
Okay, still it's funny because I said there was that little bit of like an awkward moment in the Lao experience, but
Oh yeah.
everything about that trek, I posted about it a lot on Instagram. I need to like pull it back.
Oh,
Um
the mud.
Oh my gosh, we went during rainy season and I had been in rainy season before in Thailand, and kind of like where I had been before rainy season was like, yeah, it rains for like 4 hours a day and then it's like sunny and then it'll rain at night and then it's sunny. So I was like, let's just still like keep it rocking. But Lao at the time had an unprecedented, it broke a record for however many days. So I think before we were there, the record was like 14 days straight of rain. And then we were on day like 22 when we were there in 2023 of just torrential downpour. And but we were like, you know what? This is like the number one thing we wanted to do. We're gonna do it anyway. So it was just me and Jeremy and this local guide, and we were trekking, and it was absolutely downpouring. And it was one of those things that actually like kind of broke us because it was towards the end of the trip, and we're like, oh my God, we're doing too much. Like we have
Yeah.
but that was the best experience of my life and sober. So not only that, so talk about being present for every single emotion ever. We had the highest highs, lowest lows. We're trekking through the jungle. It's absolutely downpouring. You're soaking to the bone. You're stepping in the mud and it's sinking down past your ankle and you're just sloshing. And I mean, we were like hiking for like 10 plus hours in this. Like it
My
was
God.
unreal. So we make it to this local village. Absolutely incredible. One of the like I think it was our guide's uncle was had to like go like venture down to like the hospital, and they had to like hike out, do like the same kind of trek out of the jungle we did, and had to have an operation, and they invited us to
Oh my
this
God.
blessing ceremony to bless him. And we didn't speak the language, but our local guide took us, and yeah, there was drinking and people were passing around different liquor, but we had this meal. They prepared all this special food for us, and we sat on the floor and had this like very beautiful blessing ceremony of chanting and tying white string on each other's wrists and blessing them with every string. And so then when they go, they have like their arms full of like blessings from their friends and
Oh,
family.
sweet.
And I was just so grateful to be sober and to be absolutely present and
Mm.
remember everything. And yeah, people were doing shots, but there was never a moment that not like, well, yeah, I mean, passing around, it was a celebration at the end, but I just sat around, everyone's laughing, and I'm laughing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just so grateful to be here. And I am so present. I will never, ever forget this. And then at the end of the night, they included Jeremy and I in the blessing, like on our travels. And so we all got the ties around our wrists. And again, I was just grateful to be radically present for all
Mm.
of it. And I know my drinking, and I know that my drinking is different from a lot of people's drinking.
Mm.
And it wouldn't be like, I know that like people can, and I know that, and I appreciate that.
Mm.
People can drink and have a good time. And when I drink, I often am angry and depressed and scary. And
Mm.
so I'm like, I was just so grateful that I like didn't feel like I needed that to participate.
Yeah.
Um, that was one of the best travel stories. That is like one of my most meaningful, and it was the most uncomfortable, like just
Yeah.
physically I've ever been.
I'm
Um,
just imagining you two, like I've seen the muddy pictures and I advise everybody to go and have a look. I'm just imagining you two like rocking up at this village and everyone's like, oh my God.
oh my goodness, like just absolutely soaked. Yeah, it was wild. And I think the funniest thing was like everyone was kind of walking around, barefoot and like in like shorts or like underwear, honestly. And they were like laughing at us because, we have like our hiking gear and they're just like, just take your shoes and pants off. Like, why are you like in the mud in all this gear? Like, we're like, yeah, like fair.
And
But
the
it
guy
was
hiked there with like he was going for an operation and he hiked. That's incredible.
I think so. They also had like a boat to like because we were on the river, the Mekong River, and so I think they're like brought him down and they like took a boat most of the way.
Oh.
But yeah, it was really incredible to talk about like people going to town and doing the same trek we did, and yeah,
Yeah,
it was
just on a Tuesday.
just on a Tuesday. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But that was amazing. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be present for it. And I think I know in my old life, I would have been drenched and crabby, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, 'Cause, the longer that time goes by, you just think like it's so great our brains do this, but like we think of it with nostalgia. You like only think of the good things, but in the
Yeah.
moment, it's like, oh my God. And it would have been so easy to like really get drunk and like drink those negative feelings away and like warm
Yeah.
up with liquor. And I'm like, oh, cool. I don't have to do that. And I had the best time and I remember everything. And the other thing with like mindful travel and sober travel and sustainable travel that I think partner so well is like one of the greatest gifts. Like I used to get drunk and then the next day you open your eyes, you feel like crap, and then you're like, oh, and then the next feeling is like, oh, what did I say? Or did I do anything
Yeah.
stupid?
I
And I'm
call
like,
that
oh,
the horrors.
yes. Oh, ugh. And I had them so bad. And oh my God, it was so often that it was just a part of my life. Like I was for years, I'm like, oh, it's just the way it is. And I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God, thank God that's not the way it is. But that's another thing about where I'm like, yeah, and I have these different like cultural experiences. And I'm not saying I do everything perfectly. I obviously absolutely don't. But I stand in my integrity and I like remember what was said. And
Mm.
that's also so freeing to not wake
Yeah.
up and be like, did I do something that I regret?
I'm not sober. I drink a lot less than I used to, and like I'm very happy with the amount I drink. To be honest, I'm quite casual with it. I just don't like to feel pressured into drinking. Just for background. However, I get the horrors after one glass of wine. Like I will literally have a glass of wine, and I'll wake up the next day and be like, "Oh my God!" And like for me, and I won't. I'll say to Murray, "What did I do?" He's like, "I just know nothing. You're just completely normal." But it's because,
Yes. You
yeah,
don't have to do anything like crazy to get the horrors. Like
yeah,
literally, it was just constantly where it's like, yeah, and like I know maybe you were fine, but having that feeling after drinking, and I think especially traveling when you're like
yeah.
connecting with people you don't know and
Yes,
people and
yes.
cultural boundaries or not boundaries, but like I don't know, sides of the aisle, different cultures. You're like navigating, you're like, oh my gosh, did I say something offensive? And then you like can't remember or da da da. And yeah, you may not have, but the fact that alcohol like puts you in that spirally place, like first thing in the morning, oh,
It's
it's so
horrible.
great.
For
Not
me,
have
I'm
that.
a real lovey-dovey drunk. Like especially if I meet somebody and I think, God, I really like this person. If I have a glass of wine or a glass of beer or whatever, like I will honestly be like, do you know, you're just so phenomenal. And like, like that's fine. It's not that bad. But I'll wake up and be like, oh God, like why did I say that? Why was I nice? And I'm a nice person. It's just that the alcohol like puts this like fear of God into me that I was too nice. It's so strange.
It's so funny, right? It just plays, it's like all these games. And I
Yeah.
think again, it's just like it's like you don't have to have all of this, which is why when I started the sober travel, I talk about this a lot. I put it off for a while because I was like, they say when you're picking a niche and like building your business or like building your platform or all of that good stuff, you got to niche down. And I was like, people say, I heard this a lot when I was in that of like, what do I do that's different or sets me apart or what is my work in this space? And a lot of people say, like, what do people come to you about
Mm,
the most? And I'm like, oh, it's definitely sober travel. But I'm like, who am I to talk about this? And I'm like, no one's going to care because the travel industry is so boozy. And I'm like, nobody is going to want to do this. And I found that it was just the opposite. And so
yeah,
it's like, and so I really believe this work and like sober travel is for every single person,
yeah.
whether you have a glass once a year of champagne or something, or if you're a drinker, a social drinker, wherever you fall on the spectrum, or if you are a problem drinker and this calls to you, the whole spectrum. I'm like, it's just so liberating, even just a
Mm,
night out and learning how to do things without alcohol.
yeah.
I do sobriety discovery calls, and I am not a sober coach. I'd like to be one day, but I found that people reach out to me often and like, hey, I just like am sober curious. I
Mm,
don't know who to talk to. I don't know where to go. And so I host these 1 hour long calls where we go really deep on your beliefs around alcohol, kind of like problem points or pain points or things that make you anxious, and then talk about like what a life without it or even a night without it, like what are things you think you need alcohol to do? How can we rewrite that story? And it's just been amazing to have that connection with people
mm.
because I think everyone has something in their life where they're like, oh, like I would never celebrate New Year's without alcohol. And it's
Yeah,
like, it could be pretty liberating to do it and then be
yeah.
like, oh, I don't have that belief anymore, no matter where you are. I'm like, you don't need a substance to do anything.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
say as well because I had one I'm happy to share about it. Like I was really curious about like how you did it. And it's to be honest, Lexi, it's not only something I'd go, I'm gonna go talk to someone about this because I don't feel I have a problem with alcohol. But for me it was that I couldn't have a work night out without a drink. And I was like, I just want to chat about that. And we did, obviously, as you know. And I did it. And it was really like really liberating. It was really cool. And my work friends, I don't think they even noticed.
yes.
Yes.
That is the other thing, and especially with non-alcoholic options. It was so funny, actually. Like in Australia, we had a group of friends, and we went after work, a job I had, we went out for happy hour every Thursday. And
Mm.
I went and I got my non-alcoholic beer. And it was so funny. Someone brought like months into the job, brought like shots to the table, and they were like, Lex, I got one for you. And I was like, oh no, thanks, I don't drink. And they're like, what are you talking about? I've seen you drink for months. Like every time you have like multiple beers. And I'm like, oh, those are non-alcoholic. And they like did not believe me. So, anyways, but I'm like, people are really like looking at for the most part, like people really aren't looking at you. And I know we talked a lot
Yeah.
about the more negative times people have, but I will say, like, I just also want to reiterate, they are like fewer and far between compared to the people that really don't care and like don't
Yeah.
look. And it doesn't have to be like a non-alcoholic version of an alcoholic beverage. Like even just like soda water and a lime is one of my go-tos. And like people really don't care. It's really a lot of it is you or
And
like
also
a
people shouldn't care. People shouldn't care.
oh
It's your business, it's your life. And if you want to experience the world in this way that you feel more mindful, more connected, and more sustainable, do it.
yeah. And that's why I love the sober curious movement. I come to this world from a place of recovery, but I am so glad there's this huge movement. If you've never heard of it, Ruby Warrington came up with this phrase, and her book is phenomenal. Sober Curious. Check it out, y'all. I have no stake in that game, but it's a great book. But just talking about like people that are like this middle area or not even like gray area, just of like, hey, society has always told me that I need to do this for networking, for fun, for relaxation, whatever. And I just want to get curious about what it's like to not have alcohol in these situations that I've been conditioned to need
Mm.
alcohol in, or like feel left out if I don't have alcohol, and rewrite that story. And I love that. I love that that's taking off, especially among like Gen Z and younger generations.
Yeah,
It's
they're
so
so
cool. And
bold.
I'm so here for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work too is inspiring people to take a sober trip. And I think, especially in the yoga world, retreats have been a thing forever. Retreats have always been a thing. go on a retreat, so like whatever it is, get healthy, have this space that's separate from other people. But I've also noticed that so many of these retreats, I actually did a blog post about sober yoga retreats, specifically in Bali. And actually, I found it so difficult to find retreats that were not like, and then we curate this wine experience. I'm like,
Yeah.
like, why are we doing that as part of wellness? That's another story.
Yeah.
But this idea of taking like the alcohol infusion out of it, this idea of retreating is very old. And I think people don't look at sobriety. And so I'm like, let's just take a trip. You don't have to be sober or even sober curious, but it is so transformative to change the way you travel and try it sober and just
Yeah.
see how
Give
much
it
more
a go.
present you are, how and yeah, travel is stressful, especially
Mm.
full-time travel. It's a lot. So when you're not drinking to take the edge off, like what are you open to? What are you experiencing? Like, is this for you? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Yeah.
Or what comes up and like just be there for it. And I
Mm.
think anyone that drinks less has benefits, genuinely. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone that's like, no, I need it. And I'm like, oh, and then actually, if you really do come out of it being like, you know what, I will never do that again. That was boring. I need alcohol. That's a really good thing to learn about yourself because it took
Yeah.
me very time to learn that about myself. And I always say I got sober. There was a really, really scary event that was the final straw, but I will also tell anyone that I had a lot of really, really scary events prior that would have been the final straw. But I'm like, what actually got me over the hump was like I was journaling for so long of I'm like, I just wonder who I could be without it. Because I really
Mm.
believed I needed it. And I'm like, I just like wonder if I could prove to myself that I don't. And it's just, I'm so glad I like answered that call, that like whatever you call it, deep, that I was like, I just want to get curious. So
Mm.
yeah,
Powerful.
such a travel hack. I'm like, it's genuinely just so much better. You're so much more refreshed,
Yeah.
alive. For me, like I always say, if I'm helping someone build a sober trip, I do it in three ways personally. I do it off of cultural experiences, like how can you really get off the beaten path and get more connected? Um, Outdoor adventures. And some
Mm.
people are like, oh, I don't want to do outdoor adventures, but I'm like, it doesn't necessarily need to be outdoors, but how can you connect to the land?
To
How can you
nature.
the place to nature and get your body involved. Like movement is so essential in this practice, and also local food. And I think no matter where you are on this
Three
mountain, you can
very sustainable things, I gotta
yes,
say.
and it's super sustainable, right? I
Mm.
think like if you were probably, I don't know how you would, yeah, I guess how would you advise someone like to build a more sustainable trip? Is there overlap?
Similarly, yeah. I mean, for me, there's a lot goes into sustainable travel, and I get a comment all the time. I get it all the time when I post about particularly over tourism. I get people
Mm,
saying things like, "Oh yeah, but if we're telling people, to be more respectful of people's time and not litter, like, where does that end? Like, aren't we just telling people not to be children?" And I'm like, you know what? Every single foundation of travel as we know it is unsustainable. It's all about rushing through a place, not immersing yourself in the culture, just like getting through, staying in these big hotels, um, all this stuff. There will be something that all of us do, myself included, that is unsustainable. And getting back to regenerative and sustainable travel is about unpacking that, figuring out what it is that you do, and making it slightly better. And I do think that a lot of that starts with cultural immersion and figuring out what do the locals in these places want. Because it's not a monolith. Like it's not sustainable travel in Italy doesn't look the same as sustainable travel in Thailand. Like it needs to be
yeah,
specific to the place. And for that, we need to be immersing in the culture. We need to be doing things like homestays, getting out into nature as well, figuring out how the land looks, how we can help it, and all of those things that you said. Really.
totally. Yeah.
Mhm.
When we
So,
were chatting about like me coming on and we're like okay, and again I'm like I want to be a part of this conversation, I want to be a part of this project. And yeah, I'm like the more I think about sober travel, like when you really distill it down, it's really a sustainable way of travel for
yeah,
every for the earth, people that you interact with, and yourself too. It's
yeah,
more
I agree.
um life-giving for
Yeah, I
sure.
agree. And that's a really nice conclusion because I'm going to ask you, what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
Absolutely. So I am working on my travel blog, lexontheloose.com. Go there, have a lot of blogging, articles, different things of planning trips. Mostly, I'm working on catching up on posting of Southeast Asia and Australia. So definitely check that out. And then you can also build or book rather a sobriety discovery call. Again, if this is something that calls to you, and again, it doesn't have to be from a recovery space. Love to chat 1 hour. We go deep on your beliefs around alcohol and just a sober friend to coach you through it. Because I think often people aren't really looking to hire a recovery coach. They're just looking for someone in the space to have like a deep conversation with. Yeah, so those are the two ways you can really find me. And then Lex on the Loose, Instagram. Check it out. But I'm going to be in Chicago for at least a year or so, which is crazy, but I'm going to be posting a lot about the non-alcoholic community in Chicago. There's a really cool alcohol-free community here. And I'd love to work with you, whether that's planning a sober trip. I also do trip planning. Anywhere, help you build your first or 100th sober trip, and check out the blog. I'm always writing and yeah, giving you tips on how to travel sober.
You're a busy gal. You're a busy, busy woman. So
Oh,
this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or you can reach us on www.thattravel.co.uk/the-sustainable-travel-podcast. And we also do have a Facebook group which is called Sustainable Travel Trips Group. So you can also find us there. Thanks so much, Lexie.
thank you.